Watching this monitor right now as we welcome you back to CBS News 24/7. We're watching it because we are looking at that live image of a podium in the state of Arizona. Why? Any moment now, President Joe Biden will give a historic apology to the families of indigenous children for the government's role in forcing those children out of their homes and into boarding schools. In many cases, those children ended up sick, and in many cases, those children ended up dying. We'll bring you the remarks live on CBS News 24/7. Of course, what we're wanting to know is, beyond the apology, which will go down in history and be entered into the record, what will happen relative to reparations? A lot of people saying an apology is an important first step, but what about the reparations to their families who suffered so much? So the state of Arizona, many camera crews there watching this play out. Members of the Gila Indian tribe are also there. They are making sure that their voices are heard as they meet this moment. And so we're watching. As soon as that happens, we will bring it to you live here on CBS News 24/7. So let's talk about news on the campaign trail. Candidate Donald Trump will take to the stage for a campaign rally in the state of Texas. CBS News campaign reporter Olivia Rinaldi following Team Trump. So Olivia, question, why Travis County? That's a county we're going to be hearing about on election night quite a bit. What's the strategy there?
Yeah, Reed, well, it is notable that both of the candidates are not in any of these traditional battleground states with just 11 days to go. Instead, they're both in Texas. You mentioned that Trump is in Traverse County, or rather Travis County. He's going to traverse Michigan later today. Sorry, a lot going on the campaign trail. But he's going there because it's Austin, and we know that there's been an influx of young people into that county. It's starting to trend a little bit towards the Democratic side. But on the point of both Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump being in Texas today, we know that the Vice President is going to be in Houston for a rally tonight, and there she'll be talking about abortion rights and highlighting the abortion bans in Texas. Now, that is quite notable because that is an issue that the Harris campaign believes is central to their messaging this campaign, focusing on women's rights and abortion rights. Trump, however, is going to be in Austin, and there he'll be talking about immigration and the border, and that is something that he thinks is the most central issue in this campaign. So you're seeing these topics that both campaigns are really trying to highlight in these final days leading up to the election, and you see Texas kind of being this stage for them to broadcast these important messages out with just a few days to go.
And Olivia, no problem on the T's. I hear you there. I've been to Travis County. I used to live in Traverse City, Michigan. We also know our campaign reporters are literally putting in the sky miles by the thousands. I speak T. We knew what you meant, my friend. So let's stay with the Trump campaign and his outreach, especially to male voters. He's sitting down with a famous podcaster. What do you know about that?
Yeah, he'll be sitting down with Joe Rogan later today. That is perhaps one of the most popular, if not the most popular podcast host in the U.S. So he'll be sitting down with him later today. And it all comes as Trump is really trying to reach those what they call low propensity voters, young men, young women, disaffected by politics, who have been not consuming traditional media by any standards, but what they do listen to is podcasts, and they do listen to Joe Rogan. So Trump will be taping that later today in Austin, and it's coming as part of Trump's entire media strategy, kind of bucking traditional media and instead embracing doing more podcasts. And campaign officials that I've talked to about this specifically say that this actually came from Barron Trump, that's his youngest son, an idea that he should be reaching out to young people through those means. That's why you see him doing Joe Rogan. He's done Theo Von's podcast in the past, Logan Paul's, and other podcasts that he's done. So in this final days, as Trump is trying to reach those low propensity voters, encourage them to get out and vote for him, that's where he's making his final pitch.
Yeah, Theo Von, Joe Rogan have very similar demographics. Trump also holding those campaign stops today and tomorrow in Michigan. It marks his, fourth visit to the state this month. How close is the race there in Michigan?
Oh, it could not be any closer. It's extremely tight there in Michigan. Our latest CBS News polling has this as a toss-up, with Harris having a slight edge, but it's all within the margin of error. So really, it's hard to say who exactly has the edge in that state. But Donald Trump will be heading back there today for a rally, and it's his first visit since mid-October when he was in Detroit and really disparaged the city, saying that it was on the decline. Trump coming back there today to talk about, the auto industry there, something he often talks about in Michigan. But as you mentioned, crucial battleground state, just a few days to go. We expect him to go back later before the November 5th election, but all coming with just 11 days, Reed.
All right, why do I have a feeling that Michigan's son, Michael Moore, will have a counterpoint to what Donald Trump has to say on the blogs tonight? Thank you so much for talking to us. Meanwhile, the Harris campaign rolling out the red carpet at an Atlanta rally. Barack Obama, Spike Lee, Bruce Springsteen, Tyler Perry, just some of the stars hitting the stage to endorse the vice president. Harris now making her way to Houston alongside Beyoncé to deliver remarks on reproductive rights. And that's where we find CBS News chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, Beyoncé's own song, Texas Hold'em, really, I think, says it best. There's a tornado in my city. So how's the Lone Star State responding to the Harris campaign in Houston tonight?
Well, Houston may be blue, Reed, but it is surrounded by a sea of red. Texas is not necessarily friendly territory for Kamala Harris. Donald Trump won it by 5 points in 2020, by 9 points back in 2016. So why is she coming here with just 11 days left to go in this election? One word: abortion. It's because she is really making reproductive rights the centerpiece of her closing argument, and she often points to Texas as an example of a state where tough new abortion restrictions have gone into effect since the rollback of Roe v. Wade 2 years ago. So she's coming here to point out that there could be more of this if Donald Trump is elected, and to make the case that she'll do everything she can if she's elected to restore the rights of Roe v. Wade across the country. And so just like last night with Bruce Springsteen, this is going to be a star-studded affair in Houston. She's appearing with Beyoncé, with Willie Nelson as well, and with women who have been impacted by the restrictions here in Texas, not because they necessarily wanted an abortion, but because they were trying to carry a child to term and ran into complications that they could not have addressed in a timely fashion because of the new restrictions here that have made doctors so fearful.
Right, and those personal stories, some of them are absolutely heartbreaking. Michelle Obama also making her first onstage appearance with Harris in Michigan tomorrow. It's also first day of early voting in the state. So what's her message to Michigan voters? We know that Donald Trump is going to be talking a lot about the auto industry. What is the counterpoint from Kamala Harris there in Michigan?
Well, you can't find a much more popular surrogate out on the campaign trail than Michelle Obama. She may be even more popular than her husband. So they're going for a big splash in Michigan, a rare joint appearance between Harris and Michelle Obama, who's really been saved for this final week and a half of the campaign. You've seen President Obama in multiple states, but now they're hitting the trail together, a sign of just how important Michigan is. She'll obviously be talking about unions and auto workers as well in a state that is the home to the auto industry, Reed.
Nancy, we can't let you go without asking about this, and that's the reporting that Harris plans to deliver her closing arguments this campaign season right there on the Capitol Mall next Tuesday. Reminder for our viewers, Trump gave his speech at that same location moments before the January 6th insurrection. Talk to us about the symbolism there.
Yeah, and that is absolutely not an accident. The Harris campaign says they are looking to create a contrast between Trump's vision and Harris's vision a week before Election Day. And she's gonna make the case, as she has been on the campaign trail, that he disregards democratic norms, that if he had the opportunity, he would try to seize more power than a president is entitled to. She'll argue he did it once and he'll do it again. What we're really seeing, Reed, in these closing weeks is that the Harris campaign has determined that one of their most effective messages is less about Harris and more about Trump, more trying to persuade those moderates, those independents who maybe sided with Trump in the past but have some misgivings now, that he can't be trusted with another 4 years in the Oval Office. And so that's what we're going to hear from her in a very high-profile location come Tuesday.
Nancy, I heard you use the term more power. Can you make a promise to me, along with all of our CBS News political correspondents, that you will take a power nap over the weekend? We know you're keeping the road hot. We appreciate you so very much.
I get them anywhere I can, Reed. Thank you.
Okay. Probably sitting up in a car or on an airplane. We know how that works. Nancy, thank you. Hey, our monitors live in Arizona right now, where any moment you can see the microphone. President Joe Biden will issue a historic apology to the families of indigenous children. Why? The government's role, historically, in forcing those children out of their homes and into boarding schools. CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman is live from the White House lawn to talk to us about the history here. Willie, I was raised with the children of Utah's Ute Indian Reservation near Fort Duchesne. I know about the history of these schools. I know what happened. Tell the world right now, who may not know about the backstory, what it is here to prompt an apology by the President of the United States.
Hey there, Reed. Well, for hundreds of years, 150 or so years to be exact, America essentially took these children, Native American children, from their homes, forced them into these schools that were oftentimes run by churches that were paid for by the U.S. government. And thousands of these children were essentially taken away from their homes, their culture essentially erased, taught to learn English, not learning their own indigenous language. And over time, the U.S. government has really not addressed the situation. That's why you see President Biden there today, his first trip as president to Indian country, to essentially talk about this issue. I'll also note that these children were subjected not only to physical and emotional abuse, but some of them ended up dying. More than 900 children died, according to a report from the Department of the Interior. So President Biden there to make an official apology, the first president to do so, to address the situation. And part of this is not only to remind Americans what happened, the historical context here, but I can bet you that this is part of the president's legacy. He wants to not leave office and not leave this page kind of like unturned, so to speak. So the president making this major announcement today and this apology to Native American people across the nation. Reed.
Willie, when we meet moments like this in our nation, and they are all too rare, I think about that powerful song that has the lyrics, "A long time coming." Why now? Why did it take such a long time?
Yeah, it certainly did. And one of the reasons why this is happening now is because the Department of the Interior is actually led by a Native American, Secretary Deb Haaland, and her family was affected by the situation. She talked about how her family was affected by this aboard Air Force One yesterday. She even choked up a little bit talking about this and the historical nature of it. So it was a few years ago where the Department of the Interior started to gather information and to look into this situation. And a report, the final report, was released earlier this summer, I should say. And part of that report called for the U.S. government to make an official apology. And that's what you're doing and seeing here. That's what the president is out there in Indian country to give this official apology, because it comes from the highest level of the U.S. government, not just something that you see on paper, not just a statement that you see from a secretary, for instance, but an apology coming from the mouth of the President of the United States. And I'll also note that the White House has tried to point out all of the billions worth of dollars, all of the infrastructure money from multiple laws that were signed into law by President Biden that have gone to Indian country to try to not only address some of the economic disparities in these parts of the country, but also to give those communities a leg up and build up their infrastructure, whether it's building up internet connections or building roads and bridges and those types of things. But the president today making this major announcement, of course, which some people have waited decades, if not years, to happen. Reed.
Families have waited. Willie James Inman, CBS News White House correspondent. Thank you so much for that report. And just to our viewers, as soon as the president steps to the microphone there in Arizona, we'll bring it to you right here on CBS News 24/7. Well, let's talk about something from out of space. Astronauts are out of outer space, finally. Why they had to be rushed to the hospital after almost a year stuck in the stars. That story straight ahead. All right, welcome back, everybody. We are back. Okay, so an update on that deadly E. coli outbreak story we first brought you here on CBS News 24/7. One person dead, the number of people sick now up to 75 from 13 states. That outbreak first linked to McDonald's. So let's go live to CBS Colorado's Karen Morfitt. Karen, quite a development here. We now hear there's a new connection when we talk about the source of the ingredients. What can you tell us?
Yeah, Reed, we expected the number of cases would go up. The CDC says as of yesterday, there are now a total of 75 reported cases of E. coli. That is because they say it takes a number of days for people to fall sick and to report being sick, and then it takes even longer for those cases to be diagnosed. 22 people we know have now been hospitalized due to this illness.
All right, so we now see other fast food chains also pulling onions from their menus. Tell us about the risk of contamination at those other restaurants that may use some of the same ingredients, because we see the response.
Right. Well, you know, we've spoken with local restaurants here in Colorado who say this was all done as a precautionary measure. Those other restaurants that are pulling the onions from their menus are doing that because those onions come from the same Taylor Farm source, although they are not the same exact product that is being used at the McDonald's. And so most of what we're hearing from those companies, especially those here locally that we've spoken with, they say this is all being done in an abundance of caution.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that update. We know Denver has seen quite a few cases there on your headlines there in the state of Colorado. So we're glad to talk to somebody right there at the community level in Colorado. Let's take a live look out of Nashville now, where Mother Nature serves up Nashville hot. Jess is in to talk about temperatures that are unseasonably warm. I say who because they're almost taking on their own personality.
I know. Okay, so up in New York and Philadelphia earlier this week, we were talking about record-breaking numbers back from like the 1940s. Now we're keeping a very close eye on Nashville, Atlanta, stretching all the way over into Texas too, as they're gearing up for this heat to stick around into this weekend and break records in communities too. Let's take Atlanta, for example. Back in the 1940s, that's the last time on this day we saw heat like this, sitting at 84 degrees this afternoon, which, okay, for the summertime, that's all right, but we're in the middle of fall. We're wrapping up the month of October, heading into Halloween with above average conditions lasting into this weekend too. That heat stretches from Florida all the way over into areas like Phoenix, sitting at 98 degrees today. How long is this heat going to last? Let me show you right behind me. As we head into the coming days, this area of high pressure still sits directly over those states throughout the south, bringing in well above average temperatures by about 15 to 20 degrees in certain communities. For example, Dallas, 12 degrees above average there. A similar trend over into Phoenix, stretching right over into Jackson, Mississippi. Now, taking a look at the next 6 to 10 days, we're going to continue to see a chance of possible record-breaking numbers throughout those communities as this area of high pressure sits directly over Mississippi, Alabama, all the way over into Georgia too, into the early week next week. Now, Phoenix is breaking records. Nashville, a similar trend. The next 6 to 10 days are looking well above average, stretching from Boston all the way down into Tampa and Miami as well. Well above average conditions are expected there. However, take a look at the West Coast. They're starting to catch a break as we head into this weekend and into early next week, which is great news for all those trick-or-treaters out there. However, it is going to be a warm Halloween ahead of us as we head all the way over to the East Coast. Back to you.
All right, Jess, thank you.
Again, we do have visual confirmation of Crew 8 successfully splashing down after 235 days in space. They are now back on Earth.
Video to our monitors. 4 astronauts returning to Earth after 235 days stranded in space, and there they are. You know, they should have been back 2 months ago, but problems with Boeing's new Starliner capsule and Hurricane Milton preventing that from happening. NASA says the astronauts were taken to a medical facility, they say, out of an abundance of caution. Big national story making international news. Could brothers convicted of murdering their parents walk free? We're talking about the Menendez brothers. The case, the outcry, and the potential outcome of papers filed today in L.A. That story straight ahead. Stay with us. So look close at this video to our monitors from southern Lebanon. That car marked press reduced to dust and rubble. The Associated Press reporting Israeli strikes killed 3 journalists working for news outlets considered aligned by Israel with Hezbollah. Lebanese politicians accusing Israel of war crimes and intentionally targeting journalists. Lebanon's health minister says Israeli strikes so far have killed 11 journalists, wounding 8 more since the conflict on the Israel-Lebanon border began in October of 2023. To the latest in the U.S. efforts to bring calm to the region there, Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with the Jordanian foreign minister this morning. He's echoing his call once again for an end to the conflict in Lebanon and Gaza. Here's a listen.
We've had very good and important conversations this week, including this morning, on ending the war in Gaza and charting a path for what comes next. And those conversations will continue, but I think this is a moment of importance and urgency that we're working to seize. I also had the opportunity to speak to Prime Minister Mikati in Lebanon, and there too we have a sense of real urgency in getting to a diplomatic resolution and the full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701. such that there can be real security along the border between Israel and Lebanon, and people both sides of the border can have the confidence to be able to return to their homes.
CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio is in Tel Aviv with the key takeaways to come out of Blinken's tour.
The announcement that key players are going to be meeting back here in the region is the biggest takeaway. CIA Director Bill Burns, Israel spy chief David Barnea, and the Prime Minister of Qatar all scheduled to meet in Doha. And the Qataris say that they have re-engaged with Hamas to try to bring them back to talks after Israel, of course, killed Hamas's leader Yahya Sinwar about a week and a half ago. Blinken is now in London today, meeting with his counterparts of Jordan and Qatar, along with the caretaker Prime Minister of Lebanon. Meanwhile, the past 24 hours or so has been a deadly one for Israel, Lebanon, and Gaza. The IDF said that 5 soldiers were killed today when Hezbollah militants attacked the building that they were operating from with a barrage of rockets. And those deaths are in addition to 5 other soldiers killed in Lebanon yesterday. In Gaza, the IDF continued to press on against Hamas there. Israeli strikes killed at least 38 people in the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis, according to health officials, with at least 14 of them reportedly children. And in Lebanon, 3 journalists were killed in an IDF airstrike. The IDF's only comment for now is that it's looking into it. Lebanon's prime minister said that the attack, though, was deliberate and called them war crimes. Very strong words. The possible reason for that is that those journalists worked for media companies linked to Iran and Hezbollah. That strike we saw obliterated a building and flipped over a car clearly labeled as press. Back to what we were talking about at the beginning, Blinken said Israel must do more to stop hurting and killing civilians. Back to you.
Inocencio, thank you. So let's go back to this live look out of the state of Arizona, where once again we are waiting for President Joe Biden to step to the microphone to address the Gila River Indian community there in Arizona. This has weight and significance, and historical at that. The president expected to issue a formal apology for the government's role in running boarding schools where thousands of Native American children were separated from their families and exposed to abuses and, in some cases, death. We will bring you the president's remarks live when he steps in front of that mic right here on CBS News 24/7. Looking live at Arizona right now in the lead up to President Joe Biden issuing a historic apology. Right now, you're seeing U.S. Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland right there speaking to so many people about the significance of this event. President Joe Biden to address the people of the Gila River Indian community there in Arizona to make a formal apology for the government's role in running boarding schools where thousands of Native American children were separated from their families and exposed to abuse, and in some cases, many cases, death. So as soon as the president steps to that platform, that podium, we'll bring his remarks to you live on CBS News 24/7. Before that, though, we heard about the big news out of California and the Menendez brothers locked up for the 1989 murders of their parents without hope of ever getting out. Well, my, how things have changed by today. L.A. District Attorney George Gascon will ask a court for resentencing. So how a judge responds to that request could mean that Lyle and Eric Menendez would immediately be eligible for parole. So let's bring in CBS News correspondent Jonathan Bigliotti live for us in Los Angeles on a Friday. Jonathan, what would the judge's decision mean for this case in the Menendez brothers?
Hey, Reed, it's significant. I mean, this is a major development in this case. We're talking more than 3 decades. And for the first time, the real possibility that the Menendez brothers could walk free. You had the DA in this press conference specifically saying he's going to suggest recommending the immediate release of the brothers in light of this new evidence that corroborates allegations of sexual abuse. You also have the attorney representing the brothers saying they could be released as early as Thanksgiving, though it's important to say that the legal analysts we've spoken with say that is very unlikely. In terms of what's next, you mentioned it, the case is being handed over to a judge. We're being told that a hearing will be set in the next 4 weeks or so. Depending on the decision, if he moves forward with that release, it will be handed over to the state parole board. That could take several more weeks. And when all is said and done, you also have the governor, Gavin Newsom, that could weigh in. So there is a long road ahead, but I can tell you from the family that we saw in that courtroom, they described this as the first glimmer of hope in many years. I was sitting next to the 92-year-old grandmother of both of the brothers. She's been an advocate for their release for many years now. There were moments of tears and audible sighs of relief, Reed.
Well, Jonathan, that District Attorney Gascon getting a lot of headlines, but is he getting any criticism? We do know this is an election season.
He is, and he's up for re-election. He's trailing by double digits. That has led some people to believe that this was a political move. It was a question that I asked in that briefing. He did not respond. I asked it several times, though he has previously said no, politics are not involved. In fact, something very interesting, and I know we discussed this last week. You have been watching the Netflix series. He started off the process of this press conference saying that he prioritized this decision because of all of the calls he was getting into his office from viewers of that series demanding their release. He even said that his office is divided on this decision, but ultimately he followed the evidence, saying that that evidence warranted his ultimate decision, Reed.
Netflix series and also TikTok now has a lot of young people on social media talking. Jonathan Vigliotti live for us in Los Angeles. Thank you so much for that report. City, Washington, outside of Seattle, and the case of a 15-year-old charged with the murders of his 5 family members. That juvenile's name withheld by the court, but records say that juvenile shot and killed his parents and 3 of his siblings, ages 7, 9, and 13. He also shot and wounded his 11-year-old sister. Prosecutors say he tried to blame his brother in the case. Arraignment happens within the hour. Video to our monitors takes us to New York for the arraignment of ex-Abercrombie & Fitch CEO Michael Jeffries, facing federal charges of sex trafficking and interstate prostitution. Prosecutors allege that he, his partner Matt Smith, and his employee James Jacobson created a scheme to exploit young men looking to make it in the world of modeling. Well, each of those men accused faces 15 years to life in prison if convicted. Now an update to the story of that March cargo ship crash that brought down the Francis Scott Key Bridge, Baltimore. Operators of that ship now have to cough up more than $100 million. So says the Department of Justice in a settlement with the owners and operators of that ship. That money will cover the cleanup. They write the check, but does that mean they are out of trouble? No, say many reports out of that area. The state of Maryland filed its own claim seeking money to rebuild the bridge, which could cost close to $2 billion. Jumping the map to North Carolina, where First Lady Jill Biden meets with the people of Asheville, North Carolina, very close to Chimney Rock that was devastated by Hurricane Helene. A daily concern for the people in Asheville, clean drinking water. Nearly a month after Helene ravaged the area, water there in that popular tourist town of North Carolina still not drinkable. Look at the water taps there. Many who live in the neighborhoods of Asheville say the water comes out of that tap yellow or brown. Disaster relief sites offering people a place to bathe and pick up drinking water. Asheville, North Carolina, Chimney Rock, North Carolina. The community is resilient. They will band together. I know it. I have many friends up in that area, and they are great people.
They are, and they're so resilient, widespread throughout the South, including Florida, too, where they're still dealing with that recovery from Hurricane Helene and Milton. Now, as we take a look at the South right now, they're also dealing with record-breaking heat. That stretches from areas like Georgia all the way up into the Carolinas, too. And as we head into the coming days, this heat's not breaking anytime soon. I mean, you're going to be dealing with a hot Halloween as we head into the next couple days and into next week, too. Daytime highs near Atlanta sitting at 84 degrees this afternoon. The last time we saw this heat was back in the 40s. Now, Asheville, where you just saw it a second ago, we're sitting in the upper 70s today, well above average there, and we continue to hold on to this heat, not only for our friends down in the south, but all the way off into the southwest, too. Albuquerque in the 70s today, but as you look at Phoenix, we're close to the triple digits this afternoon, and we're continuing to see a similar trend as we head into the evening hours tonight, early morning hours tomorrow. It's going to be a well above average evening. Now, another thing, too, from the Carolinas, shifting gears over into states like Tennessee, Kentucky, all the way up into southern portions of Indiana and Ohio, too. We're dealing with a lot of scattered thunderstorms with our severe weather outlook still highlighting this whole community from those storms we saw yesterday. Closer to states like Iowa, leaving behind heavy amounts of rain and thunderstorm activity. Now it's starting to break apart. It's still moving off into the east, and we're expecting that scattered storms in the forecast for us anywhere from New York, stretching right back down into the Ohio plains as we head into the evening hours tonight, early morning hours tomorrow. So storms to the north, heat to the south. America's gearing up for a very warm Halloween right around the corner.
Okay, thanks, Jess. To Texas now. Former President Donald Trump holding a rally as part of his campaign across the South. Texas is also where our very own Omar Villafranca started his week-long journey across the border on Sunday, where people are talking those border town issues. Omar crossed the finish line earlier today in the state of California. He shares the lessons learned along the way.
Day 6 of our border town journey. We started in South Texas, and more than 1,700 miles later, we're here on the Pacific Coast in Imperial Beach, California. What's interesting about this, locals tell us that while this is a beautiful view, and there's a little bit of fog, an interesting thing that happens here sometime is that since Tijuana is just over there and the Mexican coast is over there, sometimes migrants who are trying to illegally come in will come over on boat or on a water jet behind us. Now, we saw some water jets earlier. We're not sure who they were, but we do see boats out there kind of lingering, maybe fishermen, but something that locals told us to keep an eye out. Now, after traveling all these miles with the crew to figure out what's going on in these border towns, there are two things that we did notice. A lot of people feel their border communities are safe. Not everyone. But every single one of them that we talked to thinks that the next president and lawmakers some sort of immigration reform. And the other thing that they all agreed on is that they don't think that will happen, and they think everything will remain the same. In Imperial Beach, California, Omar Villafranca, CBS News.
Quite a journey at that, finishing there from Texas to California. Omar, thanks. Let's go back to Arizona, where any minute now, President Joe Biden will address the Gila River Indian community there in Arizona. Right now, you're seeing Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland there. She is speaking about the personal impacts of the fact that young people, by the thousands, were taken away from their families and put into U.S.-run boarding schools there. Some children were harmed, other children died, and that's why you're seeing her wipe a tear there. Let's listen in.
We are here healing our souls and carrying the strength of those who came before us. We are still here in prayer and ceremony. And we are still here doing our best to speak our languages, even if our parents were afraid to teach us, because that's how we honor those who sacrificed so that we could all be here today. Indigenous peoples have always been here, and today we commit to our shared future. Thank you, Mr. President, for bringing us together. Dawa. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland there talking about the impacts to so many families, Native American families, indigenous peoples, because of what happened in our nation's history. A happening that took children out of their homes to go to boarding schools that were run by the U.S. government. President Joe Biden expected to speak shortly to the people there at the Gila River Native American Reservation. We'll be right back.
The incredible heart.
Looking live right now on CBS News 24/7, where the President of the United States is standing shoulder to shoulder with the governor of the Gila River Indian community there, Governor Stephen Roe Lewis. He is about to introduce the President of the United States to make a formal apology to the descendants and the families of the thousands of children who were removed from their homes. A dark part in our nation's history, placed in boarding schools run by the United States of America, and in many cases subject to abuses, suffering, and in many cases dying. This has been something that has been talked about in circles of Native Americans for years and years, but not spoken of widely in history classes in the United States of America as it pertains to this particular story. What happens there at that microphone could change that. When a president of the United States steps before a mic and makes a formal apology to an entire nation of people there, that gets written down in history books and could very well affect the curriculum talking about the history of indigenous people in the United States going forward.
Each of
President
us
Joe Biden has said that this was
understand
something he wanted to do
solemn
before he
nature-
left office. Of course,
the
U.S.
solemn
Secretary of
nature of
Interior
this day,
Deb Haaland just a
of
minute
this
ago
moment,
speaking emotionally about
of
the
this
impact on
historical
her people.
time and
Let's go
place
ahead right now and
that
listen
we
in to
are
Governor
all
Stephen
a
Rowe
part of.
Lewis.
Today's words will be carried forward by all of us here, Mr. President, into future generations. This is a day built on respect and honor. We all know today Indian country is much stronger because of the words and actions and the heart, the ibadah, the heart of President Biden. On behalf of the Gila River Indian community, I introduce to you President Joe Biden. Thank you, sir. We love you. We love you. Everything you've done.
I'm Joe Biden. I'm Jill Biden's husband. Gov, thank you for the introduction. And to the Gila Indian River community, nothing wrong with me, Gila River Indian community for welcoming today. You know, I say this with all sincerity. This, to me, is one of the most consequential things I've ever had an opportunity to do in my whole career as President of the United States. It's an honor, a genuine honor to be in this special place on this special day. Thank you to Senator Mark Kelly, a great friend who also was married to an incredible woman who was my friend. Please have a seat, by the way. And Congressman Greg Stanton. I saw Greg when I came in. He's over there somewhere. Greg, thank you. And I'm putting these glasses on because I'm having trouble seeing this. And all the elected leaders and the tribal community leaders for being here today. You know, I can't tell you what a special thanks I have for Deb Haaland, my Interior Secretary. I was determined. I made a commitment when I became president that have an administration that looked like America, except you're America. And there's never has been a Native American, an indigenous person who was in the cabinet or in the secretary's job or any consequential job in a presidential administration. She's the first, but clearly not the last Native American cabinet secretary ever. And her historic and dedicated leadership to strengthen the relationship between the tribal nations and the federal government is unlike anything ever happened before. That's why we're here today. You know, when I got to the Senate, I was only 29 years old. I had to wait 17 days to be eligible. And after I got elected, while I was waiting, my wife and daughter were killed. My 2 boys were badly injured. And the guy that came to my assistance was a guy named Danny Inouye. And the first thing he taught me, not a joke, was, Joe, it is not Indians. It's Indian nations. He was serious, deadly earnest about it. It's been 10 years since the sitting president came and visited Indian country. That's simply much too long. That's why I'm here today, not only to fulfill my promise to be first president to visit Indian country, but more importantly, to right a wrong, to chart a new path toward a better future for us all. I'm also here today because, as I said, my wife Jill has been here 10 times in the Indian country, literally. The First Lady sends her love and said, Joe, make sure you come home. Because every time she goes, she spent a lot of time, excuse me for saying this, the Navajo Nation. I'm worried. Every time she goes, I'm worried she's not coming home. I watched that beautiful performance just now and it moved me deeply. It's a reminder of everything Native people enjoy and employ. Sacred traditions, culture, passed down over thousands of years. Long before there was a United States, Native communities flourished on these lands. They practiced democratic government before we ever heard of it. Developed advanced agriculture. Contributed science, art, and culture. But eventually, the United States was established and began expanding, entering treaties with sovereign tribal nations. But as time moved on, respect for tribal sovereignty evaporated, was shattered, pushing Native people off their homelands, denying their humanity and their rights, targeting children to cut their connection to their ancestors and their inheritance and their heritage. At first, in the 1800s, the effort was voluntary, asking tribes to sell their children, to send their children away to vocational schools. But then the federal government mandated the removal of children from their families and tribes, launching what's called the Federal Indian Boarding School era. Over a 150-year span, 150 years, from the early 1800s to 1970, one of the most horrific chapters in American history. We should be ashamed. A chapter that most Americans don't know about. The vast majority don't even know about it. I was at my hotel today. I told the hotel staff who were leaving. I said, "Where you go?" I told them. They said, "What are you doing?" I told them. They said they're natives here. They said, "I never knew that. I never knew that." Think of how many people don't know. As president, I believe it's important that we do know. You know, generations of Native children stolen, taken away to places they didn't know, with people they never met, who spoke a language they had never heard. Native communities silenced. Their children's laughter and play were gone. Children would arrive at schools, their clothes taken off, their hair that they were told was sacred was chopped off, their names literally erased, replaced by a number or an English name. One survivor later recounted her days when taken away. She said, quote, "My mother, standing on that sidewalk as we loaded into a green bus, I can see the image of my mom burned into my mind and my heart where she was crying." Another survivor described what it was like at the boarding school. I quote, "When I would talk in my tribal language, I would get hit. I lost my tongue. They beat me every day. Children abused, emotionally, physically, and sexually abused, forced into hard labor. Some put up for adoption without the consent of their birth parents. Some left for dead in unmarked graves. And for those who did return home, they were wounded in body and in spirit. Trauma and shame passed down through generations. The policy continued even after the Civil Rights Act, which got me involved in politics as a young man, even after the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. It continued. All told, hundreds and hundreds of federal Indian boarding schools across the country. Tens of thousands of Native children entered the system. Nearly 1,000 documented Native child deaths, though the real number is likely to be much, much higher. Lost generations, culture and language, lost trust. It's horribly, horribly wrong. It's a sin on our soul. I'd like to ask, with your permission, for a moment of silence, as we remember those lost and the generations living with that trauma. After 150 years, the United States government eventually stopped the program. But the federal government has never formally apologized for what happened until today. I formally apologize as President of the United States of America for what we did. I formally apologize. And it's long overdue. At a tribal school in Arizona, a community full of tradition and culture, and joined by survivors and descendants to do just that. Apologize, rewrite the history book correctly. I have a solemn responsibility to be the first president to formally apologize to the Native peoples. Native Americans, Native Hawaiians, Native Alaskans, and federal Indian boarding schools. It's long, long, long overdue. Quite frankly, there's no excuse that this apology took 50 years to make. The federal Indian boarding school policy, the pain it has caused, will always be a significant mark of shame, a blot on American history. For too long, this all happened with virtually no public attention, not written about in our history books, not taught in our schools. Let her talk. Let her talk. Oh, no, let her go. There's a lot of innocent people being killed. There's a lot of innocent people being killed, and it has to stop. For those who went through this period, it was too painful to speak of. For our nation, it was too shameful to acknowledge. But just because history is silent doesn't mean it didn't take place. It did take place. While darkness can hide much, it erases nothing. It erases nothing. Some injustices are heinous, horrific, and grievous. They can't be buried, no matter how hard people try. As I've said throughout my presidency, we must know the good, the bad, the truth of who we are as a nation. That's what great nations do. We're a great nation. We're the greatest of nations. We do not erase history. We make history. We learn from history. And we remember so we can heal as a nation. It takes remembering. This formal apology is a culmination of decades of work by so many courageous people, many of whom are here today. Survivors and descendants, allies and advocates, like the nation's Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. And all of you part of that, stand up. Stand up. As my grandfather would say, you're doing God's work. And other courageous leaders spent decades shining a light on this dark chapter. And leaders like Secretary Howland, whose grandparents were children at one of those boarding schools. U.S. Interior Department, the same department that long ago oversaw federal Indian boarding schools. Guess what? The extensive work on the breaking ground has happened with her. It's appropriate that she is bringing an end to what that very agency did. Groundbreaking report. Documenting what happened. We owe it to all of you across Indian country the truth. Truth must be told. The truth must be heard all across America. But this official policy is only one step toward and forward from the shadows of failed policies of the past. That's why I've committed to working with indigenous communities across the country to write a new and better chapter in our history, to honor the solemn promise the United States made to tribal nations to fulfill our federal trust and treaty obligations. It's long, long, long overdue. And I say this with all sincerity. From day one, my administration, Jill and I, Kamala, Secretary Howland, our entire administration have worked to include indigenous voices in all we do. Along with Secretary Howland, I've appointed Native Americans to lead across the federal government. I signed a groundbreaking executive order to give tribes more autonomy to make their own decisions, requiring federal agencies to streamline grant appropriations and applications, to co-manage federal programs, to eliminate heavy-handed reporting requirements. It's about representing your autonomy. And I might add, it's a hell of a lot more efficient when you do it too. Folks, I'm proud to have reestablished the White House Council on Native American Affairs. Relaunched the White House Tribal Nation Summit and taken historic steps to improve tribal consultation. With the historic laws I've signed, we're making some of the most significant investments in Native communities ever in American history. It's part of my Invest in America agenda, and it's helping all Americans from every state and every tribe, and that's good for all America. Helping Native communities get through the pandemic with vaccine shots in arms and checks in pockets. I'm proud this helped cut child poverty in Native communities by more than 1/3. I'm proud our economic plan has created 200,000 jobs for Native Americans. Record low employment in Native communities. With the strong support from Secretary Howell and all of you, we're finally modernizing tribal infrastructure, for God's sake. Building new roads, new bridges, delivering clean water, affordable high-speed broadband in every Native community, and so much more. Folks, we're just getting started. We're making historic climate investments in clean energy, conservation, clean water, Native communities, including co-stewardship of our land and waters. We just designated the first National Marine Sanctuary proposed by indigenous communities, which is off the coast of California. We just got that done. And I've restored and designated multiple national monuments to honor tribal nations, including the ancestral footprint of the Grand Canyon right here in Arizona, where I had the honor of visiting. It's breathtaking. It was breathtaking. I secured the first ever advanced funding for Indian health services, so tribal hospitals can plan ahead, order supplies, hire doctors, and know that the money will be there. We're also preserving ancestral tribal homelands, restoring salmon and other native fish, recognizing the value of indigenous knowledge and languages, especially those damaged in the boarding school era. In fact, my administration was proud to defend the Indian Child Welfare Act. An act that was passed in 1970 in no small part to remedy the harms of 150 years of taking Native children away from their families. But, as you all know, that act was challenged just a few years ago in the summer of 2023. Those who opposed us challenged on the ground that Native families should not have priority over everyone else in adopting Native children. Well, I took that all the way to the Supreme Court, and we won. We won. We also extended mental health programs through the Bureau of Indian Education so young people have the tools to end cycle of generational trauma. As an educator, this is something Jill cares deeply about, my wife, just as she traveled across Native communities to increase access to health care and so much more, including helping open the first cancer cure center in Navajo Nation. More to do, a lot more to do. By the way, the infrastructure bill is over $1 trillion. It's not a decade. I mean, it's not a quarter. It's going to be there for a decade. Much, much more to come, and you've got to get your fair share. By authorizing the Violence Against Women Act, an act that I took great pains in writing 30 years ago, we also reaffirmed tribal sovereignty, expanded tribal jurisdiction in cases where outside predators harm members of your nation. And as we mark Native American History Month in this November, we recognize the contributions of indigenous people to American history. You are the first Americans. I might add, you're among the most patriotic Americans. Well, that's a fact. The whole America should know, all America should know, indigenous people volunteer to serve in the United States military 5 times more than any other single group. 5 times. 5. many having paid the ultimate sacrifice in every war since our founding. To all of you, thank you. Thank you for serving in so many ways as first responders, artists, entrepreneurs, educators, doctors, scientists, and so much more. Sharing your culture and your knowledge for the good of future generations. Believing in possibilities, possibility to usher in a new era to a nation-to-nation relationship grounded in dignity and respect. It matters. My dad used to have an expression, Joey, everyone's entitled to be treated with dignity. Everyone's entitled. He meant it. Well, let me close with this. It's about restoring your dignity. I know no apology can or will make up for what was lost during the darkness of the federal boarding school policy. But today, we're finally moving forward into the light. As President of the United States, I've had the honor to bestow our nation's most prestigious medals to distinguished people and organizations all across America. That includes Native Americans who survived the boarding school era. Early in my term, I bestowed the Medal of Freedom, our highest civilian honor, on a man, my grandfather, who was an Irish immigrant and was not treated very well because he was an Irish Catholic in the coal mine era in Scranton. But he went on to be an All-American football player at Santa Clara. And every time they talked about All-Americans, he'd say, Joey, the greatest athlete in American history is Jim Thorpe. Oh, I'm serious. I knew a lot about Jim Thorpe before some of you probably even knew. As a child, Jim was taken from his home, but went on to become one of the greatest athletes ever in all American history. And earlier this week, I bestowed two other revered medals, the National Medal of Arts, the National Medal of Humanities, to 39 extraordinary Americans and organizations, including Rosetta Roll, an Alaska native. More than 80 years ago, she was a 6-year-old when she was taken to a federal boarding school. She spent 3 years without her family not known if she'd ever come home. 9 years old, she was one of those who did come home. Over the next 7 decades, she became a leading anthropologist and advocate, building a new era of understanding. Her story, from being taken from her home as a child, to standing in the Oval Office, receiving one of the nation's most consequential medals, is a story of the truth, the power of healing. When Rosetta sees young people singing traditional songs, just like we heard today, she says, and I quote, "We will hear the voices of our ancestors, and we are now hearing it through our children." For too long, this nation sought to silence the voices of generations of Native children. But now, your voices are being heard. That's the America that we should be. That's the America we can all be proud of. That's who we are. For God's sake, let's make sure we reach out and embrace. Because you make us stronger, you are America. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
President Joe Biden making an historic formal apology to the people of the Gila River Indian community there in Arizona. Of course, this is about the boarding schools that were operated by the U.S. government and the thousands of young people who were removed from their families, taken to the boarding schools to be taught English, as the president said, in some cases their children's hair cut, abuses suffered, and in many cases deaths. More on what the president had to say, including what happened there in the audience. You heard somebody speak out and say free Palestine, and what about the people of Gaza? The president said, let her talk, because there are innocent people who are dying in Gaza. So much more on what was said from the podium and off the podium on CBS News. Thank you so much for watching us. We appreciate it.